Hi, I'm Peter Rowlett.
And I'm Katie Steckles. And Peter, what's today's mathematical object?
Well, today's mathematical object, instead of a prop, I have brought a person. So let me introduce Alex Corner.
Hello.
Alex is a lecturer at Sheffield Hallam University with us, and he gave quite a fun lecture on Friday, which involved useful objects. So I thought I'd bring him to talk about these. So you've got some tiles with you.
Yeah, so these are Tantrics Tiles, which was a game I spotted when we were planning this game theory and recreational mathematics module. So it's a board game with tiles. I was more interested in the tiles themselves because they're colourful and shiny and nice.
Yes, it's a fun game to play. You sort of said to the students, I don't really care about the game, I just like the look of the tiles. And it's like, well, it's also a fun game to play.
Yeah, it is a fun game. So they're hexagonal tiles. They each have 3 colours on. Each colour connects two of the sides. And then I just got interested in trying to count them.
Yeah, I think they're really nice. As I've played around with these before, I think I've got like a mini version, like a travel version of this. But it's like each arc is either centred at the corner of the hexagon or at the centre of the adjacent hexagon, if that makes sense. So the arcs that join adjacent sides are kind of part of a circle around one of the corners, and the arcs that join sides that are one apart are kind of part of a circle that runs outside the hexagon and round the next hexagon.
It is fascinating how people see objects. That's totally not how I was seeing it, but I see totally what you mean. But yeah. I was sort of thinking they go straight across, or they curve, or they curve more severely. But I'm looking at the curve. You're looking at the edges.
Yeah, we're now putting 6 in a hexagon shape to see if it makes a full circle, and it kind of does.
It really does.
Yeah. But yeah, there's sort of on each thing there's 3 colours, and each of the arcs are a different colour, so you don't get 2 of the same colour on the same piece. And there are only arcs between 2 adjacent sides, arcs between 2 sides that are one apart. And I think there's a couple with a straight line.
Yeah, some that go straight across. But they do rule out the tiles where you have 3 straight lines going across the tile.
Yeah, I think that is a possibility that you can get with this, but they don't include it in the set.
Well, it would meet the restrictions of joining 2 edges with colours, but for some reason 3 straight lines is a miss.
Yeah, well, I think you never get more than 2 lines crossing at any point, which I guess you wouldn't have with that.
Yeah. So I was interested in counting them and sort of trying to turn that into a lesson in combinatorics, really. So what I did was there's 4 colours you can have, red, blue, green and yellow. But I decided to restrict it to 3 colours just to make it easier to plan something around. So doing that, if you actually look in the bag, there's 14 tiles. 16 would be possible if you included the ones with 3 crossings. So how do I then take that and tell students about it in a fun way? Well, I get them to play around with them for a bit, and then you can turn them into a type of necklace. So basically beads on a string. And if you imagine you've got beads on a string, if you had a necklace you might not want to flip it over, but you might consider you could shuffle the beads around so they'd be the same. Rotational
So
symmetry.
you could rotate it, but you can't reflect it.
Yeah. So what I did, you can hear me whistling, I made basically necklaces, miniatures for the tiles.
So it's got 6 beads on the necklace, so it's for a person with a very small neck.
Yeah.
I guess.
What I love about this is that it's like, well, this tile is really the same as a circular graph, and that graph can be done as a bead necklace. And because students, you'll find it hard to visualise that. Here I have a necklace, and then he produces this minuscule little 6 bead thing, and says, "Oh yeah, by the way, you'd obviously scale this up for a real neck." It's still not being very relatable.
So it's just encoding the order around the necklace.
Yeah.
I guess it's a nice analogy because with the tiles, if you were to turn one over, you'd mirror it, but the tile would then be face down, which is useless.
And there's nothing on the back.
And I guess that is then a distinct tile that's also in there. Perhaps if you were to mirror it and then kind of redraw it through on the back of the tile, you'd get one of the other tiles.
Yeah. So they actually appear if you reflect them.
Okay, and they're distinct, obviously, in the sense that they're distinct objects within the bag of tiles. But you're considering the necklaces as distinct on the assumption that if you're wearing a necklace, you can rotate it, but you can't turn it over without taking it off.
Yeah. Okay. So and naturally, mathematicians decided that was called a necklace. They also have bracelets where they do allow you to turn them over because that means you can wear it the other way around or on either hand. But we just considered necklaces. And then we started to try and count them. So we ended up sort of massively overcounting the first couple of times. We came up with the number 90 and 16 and or 16 was about right.
Because there are sort of versions where you've basically got 6 beads to put on a bit of string, and you've got 3 colours to choose from.
Yeah. So we did that, and we found that you can end up with 729 different tiles because you have 3 times 3 times 3 times 3 times 3 times 3, 3 to the power of 6. I told the students to look at the size of the bag, and you can clearly see there's not 729 tiles in there, which is obviously not a proof, but it's a good demonstration.
Sketch proof.
Yeah, sketch proof. It's some evidence.
You also did this quite nice thing where you put down one of the tiles on the visualizer and then turned it.
Yeah.
That is not a different tile.
Yeah, so there's only one of these that looks like this, even if I do sort of turn it a bit. So we went into a bit of Burnside's dilemma and some sort of group theory and combinatorics just to count some rotational symmetries. So we ended up with this number from 90, which you can get by thinking, I've got 6 edges on my hexagon. If I want to put my first colour down, I've got to choose 2 of those edges to connect. So that's basically 6 choose 2. And then I've got 4 remaining edges, and I still need to connect another 2 with another colour. So I've got 4 choose 2, and then I've got the last 2. So if you times all that together, you get 90. And then apply rotational symmetry through Burnside's lemma, and you get the number 16. And then you just rule out the 2 which aren't allowed, which gets you the number, which is quite nice.
I kind of wish we had a nice reason for why those 2 aren't allowed. It must be something to do with the gameplay, right? They just don't make those tiles.
It might be something to do with when you've got in the game. If you have a gap, you have to fill it, and I have a feeling it might be something to do with that.
I suspect there's a blog post somewhere from the makers of the game where they've explained their reasoning on this. But,
So that was sort of using it to almost recap some stuff we were doing last semester, which was good because it was some extra revision. But then I'd always sort of known something about the link between necklaces and juggling, and I'd never quite known what the connection was.
Because you said you were doing this project when you were in undergrad.
Yeah, when I was an undergrad, I did a summer research project into Enigma permutations, sort of counting, I think it was something to do with how many rotors you need in order to actually have every possible permutation, apart from...
So the Enigma machine has rotors in it, and those rotors have the whole alphabet in, but scrambled.
Yeah.
And the operation of the machine is that those rotors turn, and that makes different encryption happen.
Originally the machine had 3 rotors in out of a selection of 5, and it does sort of lots of permutations and things, and it keeps rotating. And I wanted to know if you could build a machine where you could get every possible permutation or something like that, and it turned out to be some ridiculous numbers started coming up. And then I spotted this thing called necklaces when you go on the online encyclopedia of integer sequences.
Which is a good trick. If you've got a weird series of numbers, you don't know whether a sequence of numbers, you just bung them in the OEIS and see what comes up.
Yeah, and then try and sort of match up your intuition and thinking with the formulas which appear there. But yeah, sort of necklaces came on there, but it always said site swap juggling patterns in one of the sequences, and I went, what's the Enigma machine got to do with juggling? And it's been kind of in the back of my mind for a few years, ever since I did that. So since I came up with this thing about Tantrics and it linked to necklaces, I went, well, now's the time to investigate. So about 9 days before the session, I decided, well, if I'm going to do that, I need to juggle.
Could you juggle prior to that?
No.
Wow.
Never tried.
Okay.
So we're having lunch, and he says, I can't juggle, but I'd quite like to juggle in a class in 9 days' time. Is that enough? And I said, yeah, that's enough. For a sort of basic, wobble some balls around, that'll be fine.
Yeah, so I managed to do a sort of a cascade. And
you must have done a lot of practice.
Yeah. Well, I spent a Saturday just having fun, reading about the maths of juggling, and then just taking a break and practicing juggling, and then going back and forth between the two.
It's fascinating learning juggling because you start. I mean, so there's a chap called Colin Wright who's a mathematician and a juggler who told me the thing to do is basically to throw the ball from one hand to another and try and get it to the point where you can throw the ball and catch it without moving your hand to it. So you're throwing the ball to where your hand is rather than moving your hand to where the ball is going to land.
Yeah, I think it's more about the throw than it is about the catch.
Yeah. And then you introduce the second ball, and then you introduce the third ball. And I sort of said to Alex, if you do this for a little bit every evening, you'll pretty soon. And it does come quite quickly, I think. And the flip side of that is then if you put it down for 6 months and then try again, you'll be rubbish at first, but you'll pick it up really quickly, much more quickly than you did the first time round.
I actually did hear that in a Colin Wright video. I was watching about the maths of juggling. He kept saying if you throw it right, the catch will take care of itself.
Right.
Yeah, that's the classic juggling line, I think. Because if your throw is no good, you're going to have to run across the room to catch it. Whereas you need to work on the throw more than you need to work on the catch, I think.
Yeah, I certainly did find I kept throwing the balls away from myself for quite some time.
And then in class there was a moment where you suddenly decided to walk while juggling, and that didn't go brilliantly.
Well, sometimes it's not up to you; it's the balls that are walking, and you're just following them.
But yeah, we sort of I managed to do some basic juggling because once we had one of these Tantrics tiles, we could turn it into a necklace. But then you can sort of keep if you draw a number line, and then you number each of the colours on the necklace, and essentially you just keep joining the numbers up, which are sort of the same colour on the necklace.
Okay, so you'd have like 1, 2, 3, 2, 1, 3, or whatever, repeated all the way along. Would that work? Yeah.
So I have the numbers sort of 0 to 5, or you could do 1 to 6.
Okay.
And then... So
I was thinking of it as like you cut the necklace and lay it out in a line, right?
Yeah, that's actually probably an even better idea. You cut the necklace and you lay it out in a line, and then you just keep repeating that pattern along and along and along.
Okay, so you go 0 to 5, but then you'd colour each of those with the colour of the
so
bead.
like red, blue, green, red, blue, green.
And then you do sort of little, like a parabola, a little leapfrog from each colour and connect it to the next one. And then just, if you start then numbering the gaps between the connections, that generates a juggling pattern. So the classic cascade is one where every step is a 3, because every throw is called a 3 because it goes up for kind of a time of 3 and lands in the other hand.
Yeah, kind of 3 seconds later it lands in the other hand, by which time you've already thrown the other one, so you can catch it. And
although it's sort of not seconds, it's kind of...
Yeah,
it's sort of time
kind
steps,
of beats,
right?
Yeah, because you could count a single beat as quite a long time, or you could sort of really sort of make your juggling pattern really small, but it's kind of the same.
So this brings us back to the tile where everything is a straight line crossing
the
the
turns
tile,
out
right?
the standard cascade is the tile that's actually removed from the Tantric side.
Because when a line enters on one side, it then exits 3 sides later, and that's true of all 3 lines.
Yes.
And therefore the pattern is 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3,
So now I'm just sort of rummaging to find the one that corresponds to the pattern that everybody tries to juggle when they try to juggle 3 balls. Is they pass a ball over to one hand, they throw it up, and they keep trying to throw it in a circle.
Yeah, so all the 3 balls are moving around in a circle.
Yeah, which is actually really, really hard to do. It's often what people try to do when they don't know how to juggle. But that does correspond to one of the ones in the set. I think it's the 5-1. So it's the one where everything's kind of connected to the thing next to it.
Yeah, so it's 3 separate small arcs between adjacent sides.
Yeah.
And in terms of the juggling pattern, when a line enters, it exits 5 sides later if you go clockwise around the tile, and then that one, if you imagine it entering there, it exits 1 later because it's the next side to the clockwise direction, I suppose.
So I thought that'd be a nice thing to lead students through, especially because it ended in sort of it's recreational mathematics.
Absolutely.
Seville. And there was a student who was trying to juggle this, and it was quite nice to see because he sort of threw a ball, passed one across, threw one, passed one across, threw one, and tried to get this going, and he couldn't keep it up for very long because it's a bit manic, isn't it? But it was quite nice to sort of see that this line enters and it leaves 5 sides later, and that corresponds to a big throw from one hand to another. And then it enters and it leaves on the adjacent side, and that corresponds to just passing it across from one hand to another.
Instantaneously.
You can sort of see that very clearly, whereas some of the others are quite complicated, aren't they?
Yeah.
There were some that we had... you can get programs, apps for phones or websites or whatever that will show a simulation of a juggling pattern being juggled by a little character, and there are some things where we couldn't hope to. There was some actually where Alex found videos of people on YouTube doing these particular. So some Tantrics tiles become site swap notations that are juggling patterns that work for that people have done on YouTube videos, but there are some that just no one would try that. So then we got the software to do it.
I mean, I just love this sort of history of site swap, because this is the sort of notation for writing down juggling tricks. And the way Colin tells the story, like for years people just did juggling and they showed each other new tricks that they'd discovered or learned or whatever. And then some mathematicians went, right, we need notation for this, come on. And they essentially came up with this way of thinking about, when you throw the ball, how long is it in the air before you catch it again? And you end up with this kind of, I guess it's like a braid, isn't it? It's like a sort of, you imagine, if you imagine a juggler walking forwards, the paths that the balls are taking in space will actually braid through each other. If you had like a ribbon attached to the back of each ball, you would actually braid the ribbons together in some complicated fashion.
Yes, this is the point where he started walking across the room while juggling, having not practiced that. Yes.
And kind of the site swap notation, they've developed it and worked out what the existing tricks that they already did would be if you wrote them down in that notation. But then they said, okay, but hang on, no one's doing this one, which is an obvious next one that you can do if you just tweak the numbers slightly. And someone started juggling that, and everyone was like, that's a new trick that no one's done before. And they took it to juggling conventions and events, and people were like, oh, it's this new trick, it's this really exciting new trick. But in fact, it had been there all along, just kind of sitting in between all these other ones. And the maths had allowed them to sort of see the landscape more. It's like flying up in a helicopter above a forest or whatever, in the classic mathematical metaphor of like having an abstraction of what you're doing allows you to see the whole thing more clearly.
Yeah, because I think some of the tricks as well, you sort of had two were kind of put together so that everyone's repeating the whole sequence, but actually there's two smaller sequences. If you pull them apart, you can just repeat those, and that's a trick in itself. You don't need the whole sequence.
Yeah, we had one tile that when we got the software to simulate it, it was just one ball was just going from hand to hand, and the other two balls were doing something else, and it was like two things overlapping.
So I think that's called Burke's Barrage, maybe, which happens to be one that does have a name. I think it's the 4-2-3.
Right.
So yeah, you're throwing one up, you're throwing one over to the other hand, and that's in the air, you're throwing the one in your left hand up, so you can catch that one that's being thrown over, so you can throw it back, and then.
Right.
I really like it, and that's one you can find on YouTube, which is sort of search site swap and a pattern, and most of them are on there. But then some of these really long ones are just not on there.
Well, thank you ever so much, Alex. That was really good. So we are people who are on Twitter. I'm Peter Rowlett on Twitter.
And I'm at Steckles on Twitter.
Alex, do you want to?
I'm at Alex Corner on Twitter.
Very good. Katie and I blog at aperiodical.com, and that's where you can go to find more episodes of this podcast.
And if you want to get in touch, if you have any questions or any thoughts about the things we've talked about, or any ideas for mathematical objects that we could talk about in future episodes, you can email objects@aperiodical.com.
The music is Funk Game Loop by Kevin MacLeod, licensed under Creative Commons.